Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. So I want to start with buildings. So what the Climate Secretariat explained to us was that about 25% of our overall carbon pollution is accounted for by buildings when you consider the direct use of carbon-based fuels in homes and other buildings, and when you bring in that component of carbon emissions from generating electricity to supply those very same homes and commercial buildings. So 25% is pretty big. I don't hear the same sort of enthusiasm for on the part of governments for providing incentives to get us to net zero energy homes and buildings as I do for electric vehicles. There's a lot of talk, and there's now incentives for electric vehicles to replace conventional vehicles, but I don't see that happening to get us to net zero energy buildings. Can you give your views on that?
Sure, thank you. So obviously buildings have a couple of dimensions to them. The ones we're building, we want them to be as energy efficient as possible. So we need to adopt the building codes as they are released. We're like about 10 years behind if you're thinking about the 2015 one, and then the net zero codes for 2025. So we have a lot of preparation to do. Then we have to retrofit the buildings that we have. And absolutely, inefficient buildings are a waste of money, and we're not as comfortable when we're not in an energy efficient building. But the recommendation I'm making there is that we move from what I call more shallow retrofits to deeper retrofits so that we get real big savings. And that does mean a greater number of grants to be provided to help people finance that process. It may mean other innovative programming like we've seen in places like Nova Scotia. Eddie Oldfield will talk to you about PACE, I think. But it also means attending to the needs of low and moderate income households. Those in particular, we know that NB Power has been able to expand its low income programming. That's a fantastic thing. We now need to also have a grant system that is stepped down for higher income folks, but still provide support that we need. So absolutely an area for priority, and an area that carbon pricing revenue could be used for.
So with respect to studies you were talking about, is there a study out there in New Brunswick somewhere that's looked at what potential there is from an energy efficiency perspective in buildings in terms of cutting the energy waste, reducing the carbon footprint, and saving people money?
Absolutely. Phil Dunsky, who does do consulting work for NB Power, who did present to you last week, has done several of those studies, and you might want to just ask NB Power to share that with you.
Okay, so just to be clear, NB Power has those studies, so that's why we would go to get them.
It's at least one source. There's others, but it's certainly at least one source.
Okay. All right, thanks. And with respect to other studies, you mentioned a list of them that the Climate Change Secretariat has, and one of them was on climate neutral government. Did I hear you correctly?
That's what it says in the list in the progress report, yes.
Yeah, so that was a commitment under the Climate Action Plan and a recommendation of the Select Committee, which hasn't seen much implementation at all. Do you have some sense why these studies are not just automatically made available?
I don't. It may be a reason that's related to things like the Environmental Trust Fund. I don't know if the committee realizes just how many incredible pieces of research are done by the groups through the Environmental Trust Fund, but we never see them because they're not always translated, and it's an enormous task to translate them. So if it's public, it has to be translated. But I do think that when it comes to these studies, we should be making it a priority that everyone who works in the area can be the most informed and contribute the most positively.
Thanks. Can you say something about any work you've seen on the impacts of electric vehicles in terms of their potential in the near term in New Brunswick? What needs to be put in place and then what needs to be put in place to ensure that that is realized?
So let me just start on this one to say that we own an electric vehicle in our house. So I can share kind of the main experience. The first thing to say is the incentives are fundamental. We're a moderate income household, and we never could have afforded an electric vehicle without provincial and federal incentives. So that's the good thing. The second thing, though, is the minister talked last week about the sales of those vehicles being limited by production issues, but it's also limited by lack of information. So I don't know if committee knows, but there is a New Brunswick EV owners Facebook page, and there's about 1,000 people there, over 800 people. And if it wasn't for those people, we as a family would never have managed the transition to an electric vehicle. The dealership didn't provide information. They just weren't ready to help you figure out what kind of charger do you put in? Where do you find your electrician? If you're older, how is everybody who's going to have a car that's electric dealing with all the apps that we're being asked to download? We're just regular people. We don't really want an app for everything we do. But finally, the charging infrastructure is insecure. We charge at home. We have a level 2 charger. We're definitely saving money for sure on fuel costs. But when you're on the road and you have to charge elsewhere, every charger has its own card. You can't use credit cards and debit cards. Sometimes they don't work. So if we're going to really get the public into these vehicles, we have to make sure that the infrastructure is as simple and easy as it is today to go to the gas station.
Then on the climate change fund, have you looked at how effective climate change, the climate change fund receives the revenue from the carbon tax? Have you evaluated in terms of how effectively that's being invested in terms of the amount of carbon reductions it's achieving, or on the other side, the amount of risk it's reducing in terms of climate change adaptation?
So I guess a couple of things there. The carbon pricing money goes into 3 pots, right? We reduce excise tax on gasoline. We provide a tax cut. We, that's the decision of government. So there's an income tax cut, and then the rest, 36 million, goes into a pot. But most of that money, other than the EVs and some money transferred to SMRs and to MB Power, primarily goes to government departments to fund things they want to do. So the concern is, of course, that that's offsetting money that government should have spent on its own anyway, like certain infrastructure projects, and that the money isn't going to reductions in terms of community operations. Many of the investments, if you look at this year's list, is our studies. Getting ready, good, preparation. Those are all important things to do. I don't have any denial there. But we do need to be rigorous about ensuring that we are investing in projects that are new and additional.
And then on the electricity strategy, we haven't heard anything, it feels like, in years on what's going on with the discussions among provinces and utilities for the Atlantic Loop. So where do you have any idea where that sits? Is it actually something that looks like it's moving forward, or, it's just, I think it's been 2 years since we've seen any kind of a progress report.
So there is something for committee members. It's called the Clean Power Pathway. It does include federal, provincial, and utility representation from the region. There are discussions and technical reports. It is like pulling teeth to get access to these reports. There is the latest version that came out looking at the technical opportunities for the Atlantic in terms of phasing out carbon and connecting to hydro. It is a very important report, very positive in terms of its insights into what our opportunities are. And I would suggest the committee maybe ask to see that.
And who does the committee ask to see that kind of a report?
I suspect you could ask Minister Holland for it, yeah.
Well, I think he's right here, so.
Oh, he did come, Minister Holland, welcome.
I don't know, I haven't seen him, but maybe he's there. Anyway, okay, so thank you. One of the threads here is that there's a lot of work that's been done, but we're just not seeing it in terms of helping to inform at least MLAs about how best to move forward in New Brunswick, and that's even more opaque to the average citizen. So it seems like that's an issue. Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuhn.